Well, welcome to the leap year edition of the Beanstalk DAO meeting. Appreciate everybody swinging by. We will try to keep this relatively well managed in terms of time, but wanted to walk through quite a few updates as to what's going on with Beanstalk Farms and the projects that are underway, and to kind of give everyone a preview of coming attractions. So put the deck into the general chat a little bit earlier on. Made some updates. We'll make that public here again, probably a slightly modified version after we finish up. And then I saw that Canadian Bennett's going to be putting up the recording not too long after we finish up today as well, for folks that missed the meeting. But yeah, glad to have everybody here, and we'll get underway. Okay. So, kick off with some big items up front. So, handful of things have been going on around the farm and around Beanstalk Farms for the last couple weeks. Probably the biggest thing is the passage of the Beanstalk budget and the bug bounty program for first half and likely second half of 2024. We also had EBIT 14 was committed, removing the vesting period, and that was basically done to help manage a potential security issue that was discovered back when we made the initial transition to the ETH well in Basin. Then BFC 16 or A16 passed, which was adding me to the BFC, and then BFCP C4 passed as well, which extended terms for Guy Mod and Sweet Red. And then upcoming items, the big thing is Seed Gauge system is entering its final Cypherin CodeHawks audit competition. We'll have a little bit more about that later on. Okay, to jump into projects and initiatives. So speaking of Seed Gauge, so Breen and Guy were really generous enough to walk me through and put a ton of information in to the Gantt charts here for the three projects that we're going to be covering today. And yeah, a lot of detail in these charts to kind of give farmers an understanding of what's been going on and the work that's been happening up to this point. Just to kind of give everybody here kind of an understanding of what we're looking at in case you're not real familiar. So basically the idea here is that we've got the last couple weeks kind of to the left of that blue line, and then everything that's coming out in the future, or at least over the next, I think, 7 weeks to the right of it. And when it comes to those tasks on the left, anything that's highlighted in green has already been completed. So if I were to make that chart go back further into the past, we'd have, more horizontal lines, but, we can assume that everything that's highlighted in green on the left has already been done. So, that's a really good indication of all the work that Breen's been doing and the rest of the team to prepare Seed Gauge. And then when it comes to the actual colors that you see in that Gantt, the colors themselves, blue versus purple versus, yellow or red or brown or whatever, they're kind of arbitrary. What I would want the group here to understand is that one of the things I want to capture was level of confidence around how long a task would take. That seems to be a question or something that comes up a lot in conversations, in Discord is, there's tasks, but sometimes there's question about like, how confident are we that, doing a certain thing will take a certain amount of time? How do we know that, doing the remediation related to the CodeHawks audit is going to take 2 weeks? And so, with this system, it gives us the ability to say, well, we're pretty confident that it's going to take about 2 weeks, but we understand there's some potential risk in there. If the remediations are a little bit more significant than what we thought they would be, or whatever. So that lighter color, those lighter shades, are to give the DAO an understanding of level of certainty around what a particular task is going to take in terms of time. And then Some other items kind of just around these slides. Obviously, under that title, we've got a target deployment date. So we've got that for the week of April 15th, and you can see that in the chart. The reason I mention that is that in some of the later slides, it's going to show there are a couple items or a couple projects that the target deployment is beyond what we show in the chart. So the chart will show you what's being worked on in the near term. The target deployment date is what we're looking at in terms of when that feature or that project's actually going to be put into motion and put into service. So I think that's it for the chart. So won't go through a whole ton of detail here, but will mention that, as I said before, so we're into the CodeHawks audit. That's going to take about 4 weeks for the seed gauge system, and then we're anticipating about 2 weeks worth of remediation. And then right at the end of that remediation process, that's when we're going to be finishing up the BIP itself and sharing that with the near final code in Discord, and then we'll have the BIP voting period hopefully the week of April 8th. Breen, Guy, I don't know if there's anything in particular you'd want to add on to this.
Sure, happy to. If people noticed, there was a budget proposal, not the budget BIP, but a couple weeks ago, a Beanstalk Farms budget proposal, BFBP, to go up to spend the beans for this upcoming audit. And in there, I gave some context on the decision around that, but just to talk about it for a second, I think that our experience and the DAO's experience with these decentralized, incentivized security programs like Immunify, where the white hats or the auditors in question only get paid if they find a valid vulnerability, have proven to be very successful, particularly in the couple of instances towards the end of last year where there were a lot of funds at risk, and from a couple different vulnerabilities that were reported by Immunify white hats. And given that those were found even despite going through multiple private company audits, and if you consider last year, for example, the Bayesian Code Arena audit, despite having been audited by Halborn and Cypherin previously, there were still plenty of issues found, and so we're very fortunate to have gone through that process and paid the beans up front rather than had the vulnerabilities live, especially in an immutable protocol like Bayesian. So this is all to say that part of the rationale for transitioning from unclear if we're transitioning entirely from private company audits to these decentralized audit competitions, but at least at the moment we want to run that experiment. So that's what's going on now. And then also written about in that snapshot proposal was an explanation of some of the things that needed to be changed from the existing gauge system, where that version was audited in October, November, and had talked about it then. And of course, it's been many months since then, but hoping to get this over the finish line soon. And just one other thing I wanted to mention, which Rex already highlighted, but this remediations portion after the audit. Of course, if there are any valid findings that we want to change the code for, that is going to take some amount of time between the end of the audit and the beginning of the vote. So hard to really estimate exactly in terms of number of weeks how long that takes, but we felt it was reasonable to estimate to throw a couple weeks up here, but subject to change, of course.
Thanks, Guy. Anything else from?
One more quick thing while we're on the topic of Immunify, and was just thinking about it as you mentioned the last EBIP, but there have been a few different BIRs, these proposals for the Immunify committee to vote on bounty payments in the last couple months. I think there have been a couple that were 10,000 bean bounties and one that was 50,000. I just wanted to point out that I think that it's a little bit of speculation, but I imagine some of the attention that the bug bounty program has gotten was probably a result of that large 1.1 million bean payment in November. And given that it does appear like there are more eyes on the program at the moment. I think it's very exciting that not only a couple more bugs have been found, but that there's multiple people spending their time looking at all this Beanstalk code, and fingers crossed, hasn't been anything extremely significant. So for whatever that's worth, I feel like that's very exciting.
Thanks, Guy. Any other? I'll open it up momentarily to the floor. Any questions about seed gauge while we're on this slide?
Nothing on this end.
I was going to say, and since I'm sharing my screen, I've only got one screen today. If there's stuff up in like the Barnyard chat, I'll need a little bit of help. I guess I could set up my phone alongside, but if someone sees something in the Barnyard chat, just let me know and I'll stop for a minute. Okay. Keep jumping then. Onto wstETH migration. Okay, so for full transparency here, definitely did not know how to pronounce this until Guy said it. Had a real boomer moment when he said wstETH. So wstETH migration. So on track. That contract work is underway right now. So right now we were entering a period where we've got essentially a pause while the CodeHawks group is working on seed gauge. So for the moment, the development is essentially completed to the point where we're willing to provide that code to Cyphren for the CodeHawks audit competition, waiting on the current competition to close out, and then going to be able to go through the CodeHawks audit when that starts up around April 1st, 2-week period there. And then kind of similar to what we were talking about with seed gauge, there's going to be a period of remediation. As I understand it, less code to audit, potentially fewer remediations to have. We'll see how it goes. Right along with this, though, and you'll see it down near the bottom of the contract development items, there's another interim period where Multiflow v1.1 is going through its audit and remediation period. And really, that's a kind of an important note to make here with Multiflow that's in the next slide. These two projects, they're separate items, but they do coincide in terms of their deployment. So, essentially looking to deploy both these items at the same time. So we're going to see some coordination as these items start to come together. But then near the bottom again, those general and administrative items, basically just getting the BIP draft ready, and then the BIP voting period. And then as you see near the top, where we're looking at the week of May 20th right now for target deployment for wstETH. Any questions on that before I jump down to Multiflow? Or anything to add, Guy or Breen?
I'm maybe getting word in my DMs that wrapped wstETH is better than wstETH, but
wrapped wstETH. I'm fine with that. You guys you just let me know what you want me to say, and by golly, I'll say it. Wrapped wstETH. You got it.
I like wstETH, but you should feel free to call it whatever you like.
All right.
Maybe just to summarize what this change is exactly for folks who haven't had a chance to read the related RFC. This is mainly a couple things. It's one, whitelisting a bean wstETH well. And related to that, it'll have to be determined exactly how many gauge points it'll get versus the previous bean ETH well. And then secondarily, or primarily, if you prefer, part of the BIP is to migrate all of the unripe liquidity from the current bean ETH well to this bean wstETH well. along with other associated work which you can read in these bullets related to Oracle support for minting, converts, EDV calculation in that well, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess we'll talk about this on the next slide, but proposal of this BIP is also blocked on the new version of Multiflow.
So, Guy, you and I have been talking so much about like what this meeting is and stuff for the actual the deck and stuff that I haven't had time to ask a couple random questions, but just so that I understand. So, the whitelisting of this well, I mean the existing Bean well still stays in place, correct? This is essentially a second well in addition to.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, just so will once this new well is whitelisted, will the Bean well still remain in place? Just the liquidity will be moved?
Exactly, but specifically only the liquidity that's underlying unripe Bean ETH.
Yep.
The liquidity in the non-unripe, if you will, Bean ETH silo will remain.
Okay. Yeah. So essentially, if folks are still looking to have that more direct exposure, then they could keep their liquidity or they can move it over. And could you? So you talked about the concept of rebasing versus not rebasing. I've got to ask these, probably kind of remedial questions, but could you walk us through that idea that that there's an advantage to the wstETH or wrapped stETH well because of the rebasing process or not rebasing?
I mean, if I remember correctly, stETH, non-wrapped stETH, is rebasing, meaning that the supply expands and the number of tokens that people hold in their wallets increases whenever there's whenever that yield is distributed, and wrapped stETH is just a wrapper around that rebasing token where the token amount doesn't change, but the value of the token would fluctuate. And the long and the short of it, I believe, is that wells don't support rebasing tokens.
Gotcha.
So Pizza Man asked a question in the chat. He said, curious why this is blocked on the new multi-flow pump. And yeah, that's exactly right. The same bug that happened upon the initial Bean ETH migration. So at some point, one thing that hasn't been written about in the RFCs is potentially migrating the current Bean ETH well to a new Bean ETH well that uses multi-flow v1.1, because it's currently the old multi-flow is attached to it with the existing issue that was surfaced in, I think it was EBIP 9, which I'm happy to talk about if people have questions as well. So it's not blocked, explicitly, but if we were to deploy it without the new multi-flow version, it would create even more extra migration work, if that makes sense.
All right, maybe that's a good transition to go down to multi-flow. All right, so multi-flow. Guy, you want to give a quick description of this process? Because admittedly, this is one that I read through, and I thought I'm going to need somebody with a little bit more understanding to talk through it.
Sure, to maybe try to give the TLDR on what this change is. And of course, would recommend that everyone reads the multi-flow RFC. But the issue in EBIP 9, as I recall it, was that in multi-flow, the reserves have a max, are capped in terms of each block. The reserves in the pump can only change so much. And so whenever the reserves in the pump change by orders of magnitude, like it did in the liquidity migration, where it went from hundreds of thousands to tens of millions, that introduces a problem where the ratio between the two tokens in the pools doesn't change until it catches up several or many hours later. And so I won't be able to talk eloquently at all as to how that is solved from a technical perspective, but that's what is fixed in version 1.1 of Multiflow. And we thought it made the most sense to audit them separately, given that they're part of separate protocols, separately being the wstETH migration versus Multiflow version 1.1. So that, I believe, let's see, that audit will start, I think, on the 22nd of April and probably last a week, given that the amount of code change is much less than both the gauge system and the wrapped stETH migration. And both of those audits will need to finalize and then be remediated in order to propose that BIP. So yeah, maybe in the next meeting we can have some sort of way to either scroll forward on this chart or have multiple screenshots or something like that.
Yep. Yeah, and we will have we'll be a couple weeks further out into the future anyway, so we should be able to see further down the road. But all right. So yeah, appreciate the that TLDR. Yeah, we're for Multiflow. And as Guy mentioned, a little bit less complicated, at least compared to the seed gauge system and wrap stETH. So fewer tasks to be done. The thing that I'll mention again is there's this interim period during the other scheduled audits for the CodeHawks team. So just something for this group to keep in mind that there's something of a stack in terms of Cyphern's work or the CodeHawks team's work. But I think the last item that I would mention here, and just to make sure that I'm right. So Guy, this won't involve a BIP. This will be deployed. Will it be deployed with the wrap stETH whitelisting just as part of its BIP, or will it be deployed just without a BIP at all?
Good question. So Basin is a separate protocol, and so these pumps will be deployed separately from Beanstalk. And in order to propose to use this pump as part of Beanstalk's minting process, etc., it'll need to be deployed before the BIP is proposed, and then included in the BIP. So
Gotcha.
That'll be the order of operations.
Okay, so this would be deployed, and then the BIP for wrap stETH would go up and include Multiflow v1.1.
Exactly. So every well has a pump attached to it, and currently Beanstalk for the BeanETH well is reading data from Multiflow v1 in order to determine delta B, among other things. And so after this stETH migration BIP, there will be 2 wells whitelisted in the silo. One will be the BeanETH well with Multiflow version 1, and the Bean with stETH well with Multiflow version 1.1.
All right. Any questions from the group about wstETH or Multiflow? Okay. So to jump down to other projects and initiatives. So really what we got here listed are basically just the existing RFCs. And so right now, we've only got the Gants, the 3 Gants that were shown above. I think as we get, especially now that the budget BIP is passed and we're getting devs spooled up to start working on some of these items with a little bit more, consistent dedication, I think we'll probably be in a spot where we can start to open up Gants for some of these other items. Some, depending on level of complexity, may not need a specific Gantt, but we'll look at each of them individually, especially as we really get underway. But as I look down through the list, obviously Tractor is going to be a relatively large undertaking, and there's been a lot of discussion in general about tractor and inside of its RFC as well. I guess there aren't any that I was going to specifically focus on, though. I hate to keep tossing it out to you, Guy. I mean, any of these listed that you want to talk through specifically?
Sure. I mean, I figured we could start from the top and see if Deadman's around at a mic. Perhaps Deadman, you could talk about some of the things that you have worked on, like these first 3 bullets, and what you're currently working on in the form of the well-deployed script and documentation.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, hello everyone. Nice talking to you guys finally. So I have started on the implementation of the first three projects. So the first one is the BDV decrease. So the rationale behind that is that Beanstalk measures the BDV of a deposit asynchronously at the moment. So what that means is that you deposit beans or any other whitelist asset in the silo, and that locks you a BDV score, let's say. That only happens one time unless you convert. It then updates your BDV. Right now it can only go up in number, so with that update it will have the ability to decrease as well. Another important note on that is that anyone can update everyone other's BDV, so that would be some interesting dynamics there. And now in terms of the first metadata, that's essentially a migration. Right now the metadata is hosted on centralized servers and are being generated like once an hour. With that new implementation, the metadata will be generated on chain as dynamic SVGs, so anyone can query that, be more permissionless and resistant. Next up, we have the soil issuance update. That's to update the soil to be the max of the delta B, and from the instantaneous pump, and the delta B, if I'm not mistaken, the delta B as measured from the pump, from the instantaneous reserves, and the current delta B of a given well. That's in order to minimize the debt issued by Beanstalk at any given season, and not issue more debt that it needs to in order to return to PEG. The implementation for these 3 RFCs is currently live up on GitHub, as I have linked to in the respective channels. We plan to bundle them up into a separate BIP, something like a miscellaneous upgrade BIP. And yeah, in terms of the well deployment script, I've been working on that as a side project for now. I intended to, use it as to lower the friction for users to deploy new wells to basin, but apparently it gained quite a bit of popularity, so I'm planning to make it a bit more generalized to support to add the features for vanity addresses and like a registry of version of basin components, so can anyone mix and match components, pumps, well implementations, well exchange functions, etc. Right now it's just a prototype, but we shall see moving forward. We plan to use it for the wstETH migration and for any other wells moving forward. So yeah, that's an update for me.
Amazing. Thanks for walking through that, Deadman. Yeah, as Deadman mentioned, the current thinking is to propose to bundle a few of these, sort of miscellaneous projects, if you will, together as a single BIP, not just for a proposal, but it also makes our lives easier from the perspective of getting it audited, etc. And so along with those 3 projects, again, this is just the current thing at the moment, but alongside BDV decrease, FERT metadata, and soil issuance would be to add 2 things to that BIP. The first being the new wstETH well migration I mentioned earlier. Earlier, I'd described how after the wstETH migration BIP, there will be 2 wells in the silo. The new wstETH well with version 1.1 of multiflow, and then the wstETH well with the old version. And the hope would be to migrate that wstETH well using the old version of multiflow to the new one. And then the 5th, which is at the bottom here, is one thing that we've been thinking about potentially, not really decided up to this point, and would be curious to hear farmers' input as usual, but have generally been thinking that the reward for chopping, or reward, maybe that's not the right word, but what you get out of chopping is extremely low at the moment. I think the chop rate is something like 0.97%, and just zooming out a little bit, feels like Beanstalk is in a relatively strong position from the perspective of it has sold 20% of the fertilizer at the moment. It's been growing steadily over the last few months, and it's more art than science, really. But the thinking is that it could be a little bit more aggressive in terms of what it gives to choppers. So some ideas we've thrown around at the moment have been, and for reference, the current calculation is the percent recapitalized multiplied by the percent of debt repaid to fertilizer. I don't know what the percent of debt repaid to fertilizer is off the top of my head, but I believe the percent recapitalized or recapitalization is 0.22 at the moment. One idea we've been considering and discussing is changing it to the percent recapitalization squared. What would that be right now? 0.22 squared would be 0.04, so 4.8% or something like that. Thank you, Pizza Man. Quick on the draw. So that is, likely to have more impact from an economic perspective than in terms of like magnitude of technical change. So the thinking is to include that as part of this miscellaneous upgrade BIP. And so at the moment, what we're thinking is spacing out each of these audits with a week in between. We'll see how that plays out, but assuming that schedule stays true, then hopefully those 5 projects could audit it together towards the beginning of May.
So, Guy, you had mentioned early on in the meeting the advantage of using groups like CodeHawks as opposed to a centralized auditor. Do you think that there's some consideration about maybe potentially spreading out some of the audit work to lessen the impact of having to wait on teams?
Well, CodeHawks, the auditors are not necessarily a team, and no one has to audit Beanstalk in that case. It's like there's just people in the CodeHawks community who decide on a case-by-case basis whether they have the time and willingness to audit Beanstalk during that time, based on an infinite number of factors, including the size of the prize pool and how much they stand to gain, of course.
Gotcha.
So the thinking is that while in theory we could certainly overlap some of these if development has sufficiently wrapped up, but based on guidance from Cyphren being the team who runs CodeHawks, like operationally, they're not necessarily the ones auditing the Beanstalk code in this case. Again, it's this like decentralized set of white hats, but the thinking that is if we were to overlap some of them, that would sort of split attention unnecessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the long and the short of it.
No, that's fair. Yeah, it's something that ran through my mind as we were looking at schedules. So,
and even if we were to do something like schedule one on Code Arena and one on CodeHawks at the same time, my suspicion is that a lot of these people participate in both.
Oh, that's fair. That's a really good point. Not something that I considered, because that makes sense that they may be kind of drawing from the same talent pool. That's
if there were another protocol running a competition with twice the size of the prize pool at the same time, that would not necessarily be great from our perspective.
Do we have insight as we talk with groups like Cypher about exactly that? Do they if you guys talk with Cypher and say, hey, we want to schedule such and such an audit, is there an ability to say, hey, let's plan it around this other thing that's happening, because there's this other audit competition that's happening that could potentially draw talent away? Is there some ability to?
Totally. I mean, part of the reason we want to experiment with CodeHawks is because of our pre-existing relationship with Cypher, no doubt.
Yep.
So they've been very helpful on that front.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Quasi Matt asked, the proposal was to percent recapitalize squared. I'm not quite sure I followed that part, but he says remove debt, repay deferred entirely. Yes, potentially, based on the example I proposed.
All right. Any other questions? I mean, the last slide was just basically opening up the floor. Questions, thoughts from the group?
Maybe we have a couple of the devs who are working on some of the other projects that are on that list.
Yeah.
So I don't know if maybe Pizza Man or Funder are around and add a mic and want to talk about sort of the status, if you will, of Gen Convert and Tractor and what's being worked on at the moment. General sense of maybe timelines, perhaps.
Yeah, I can speak to Tractor a bit. Most of the contract stuff is done, and the general system of Tractor is implemented and ready for internal review and audit. But I think that's pretty low down on the audit queue priority list. And then it's going to be expanded with an SDK, which is something I'll be working on in March and expect to get done in a decent bit of time. I mean, shouldn't be too crazy of a timeline on that SDK. I think that ultimately the biggest delay will be how long it takes to get it audited and secure. Once that's ready and implemented, the SDK should be ready, and hopefully we can update the UI and things can get running pretty quickly.
Funder, I'm gonna probably reach out to you at some point to talk about a Gantt too. I know you got a lot of stuff going on, but I may try to get on your schedule.
Sounds good.
That's awesome. I can talk about General Convert here for a bit. So yeah, Funder already laid out a lot of the foundation for the pipeline interaction with Beanstalk. So part of the cool, sauce with General Convert is that you can pass in a pipeline call. So pipeline is the thing that allows you to basically call any set of functions anywhere within DeFi. And the idea being, for example, let's say you wanted to convert between the Bean ETH well and convert into pure Bean. So when you pull out your Bean ETH, half of that of your deposit is ETH. And let's say you wanted to take this ETH and do some, DeFi magic in order to turn it into more Bean than you would have otherwise. So for example, let's say you took your ETH and you traded it to USDT, and then you took your USDT and you converted that somewhere else, and eventually you get back into Bean, and then all of that is returned back to Beanstalk, and you end up hopefully with a greater BDV than you originally had. BDV meaning Bean denominated value. So you input more than you originally started with on that convert. And so that requires, this functionality of being able to pass this series of pipeline calls in addition to like being able to copy and paste data as a result of these calls into the subsequent calls, so that you can take the full amount from your trades and pass them to your future trades, basically, in order to, have the full benefit and functionality of this. And so Funder already actually did like 90% of the work on that. And so I'm just kind of putting all that together as a bit of glue into this new convert function. And then the second kind of half of that I'll be working on too, once I get the some good tests working with this pipeline convert functionality, will be actually implementing the stock bonus and the excuse me, the stock penalty if you convert beyond peg or in a way that is actually benefiting the peg. And so initially, we're actually going to probably split this up into two parts, like two separate BIPs. So the first BIP will include this farm, like pipeline call functionality, in addition to the the penalty if you convert beyond peg. And then the second BIP will actually, because the idea is that the stock bonus for a convert is based on whoever had, like, whatever deposit that you're converting to of that silo asset type has the least amount of grown stock. The idea being, if you convert to that asset type, then you will get a bonus of that amount of grown stock that most recent silo deposit has. And so in order to know that, we have to be able to look up all of the silo deposits on chain, which is currently not implemented. Like, you can only read a deposit if you already know basically what the stem is, which is like kind of like the deposit time and the depositor. So there's no like list that's stored on chain, because that would require updating this list for every single silo interaction, which would take more gas, unfortunately, but might be a reasonable amount. So anyway, for that reason, the idea being that seed gauge will be more effective if there's some version of generalized convert that is implemented sooner, and then the details about the bonus and the penalty can be like a phase 2 for that. So as far as timeline, I mean, it's hard to say. I'm kind of just getting started, with Beanstalk here full time, thanks to the budget getting passed. So as I ramp up, I should have a better estimate into timelines.
Thank you, Pizza Man. Appreciate that. And I'll be bugging you too, I'm sure, over the next few weeks once you get settled in.
Thanks.
All right. So we hit almost all the items on this slide. So, there's secure Beanstalk, the blacklist mitigation, generalized flood, and then Hypernative. Guy, you want to hit on any of those before we open the floor up?
Sure. I mean, just to tie a bow real quick on what Pizza Man and Funder were saying, and I think both of them have been, chugging along with Gen Convert and Tractor respectively over the last couple months. But as Pizza Man said, now that Beanstalk Farms does have more runway, I think it open and expecting things speed up a fair amount, which is very exciting, given that they'll both be able to work on Beanstalk in a more committed capacity, thanks to the budget, which is very exciting. Let's see. Brian, do you have anything you want to say about secure Beanstalk?
Yeah, just to give a high level overview of what secure Beanstalk is. Secure Beanstalk just adds additional security to interactions of Bean and any ERC20 into Beanstalk itself. As we're growing and as we evolve, it does seem like security should be the most important thing that Beanstalk should focus on. As for the implementation, we're still on the design phase of what does it really mean to secure Beanstalk. Currently, one of the problems or one of the things about Beanstalk is that, its eternal state relative to Beanstalk is unknown. So for example, Beanstalk doesn't know which silo portion of a bean is in Beanstalk. So for example, a bean could be an earned bean, a bean can be a harvestable bean, a bean in the silo. It's all in this one Beanstalk contract, and it's really hard to know what goes where. So, part of the secure Beanstalk is, creating this system where Beanstalk's able to know where every part goes, and creating these invariants or conditionals to ensure that every bean is in the right place. In addition, any interactions with the silo or any interaction with Beanstalk dealing with bean, correctly updates these states and updates the whole state space of Beanstalk.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you. Yeah,
And
appreciate
for what it's worth, I think perhaps doesn't particularly apply in the case of the governance exploit a couple years ago, although that was fixed by not having governance, at least as a short-term fix. But in the case of secure Beanstalk, I think that there were multiple eVIPs that would have not been necessary, essentially, or at least at the very least would not have had funds at risk due to the vulnerability once we have that in place. If it wasn't clear what the inspiration was. These next two, don't think really anyone has thought much about blacklist mitigation or generalized flood since those state space calls and discussions. I think that the devs are booked at the moment. The last thing here is Hypernative, which I don't think we've talked about for a while. Gal, the CEO of Hypernative, gave a presentation to the DAO at one of these DAO meetings, maybe 10 months ago now or something like that. And their product has improved a lot and gotten a lot more flexible. And to summarize what working with Hypernative would entail is that they offer software that has caught, monitors all the activity on mainnet and has detected something like over 98% of the exploits that have happened on chain on mainnet over 2 minutes before they were executed. Because typically there's some malicious contract that is deployed before an attack is executed. And I don't quite remember the stats on the ones that they've caught in less than 2 minutes, but the point is that in Beanstalk's current state, where it is guarded by a multisig with people who have to sign transactions, it's not realistic for the Beanstalk community multisig to respond to something urgent within 2 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that. But with Hypernative, it could potentially. And so the idea is that using Hypernative software that has detected these exploits with very high efficacy and few false negatives or false positives for that matter, that upon detection, all the functions on Beanstalk would be removed. Because related to secure Beanstalk, it's those functions that change state in Beanstalk that, when implemented improperly, have the potential to have funds be vulnerable, essentially. So the current thinking is that by working with them and using their software that detects these exploits, it can programmatically remove functions from Beanstalk to protect it. So, hopefully it's kind of clear there's a theme here among working with Hypernative, working on secure Beanstalk, scheduling these audit competitions. It's certainly top of mind.
Agreed. Appreciate it, guy. Thank you. All right. Well, so that's all we got for the slides. Are there any other questions, thoughts, anything else from the group you want to talk about? Well, this was good. I appreciate everybody's time. Looks like we're just short of an hour.
Are you able to pull up the Barnyard chat? Tyler B has a question.
Oh, yeah. Hey, give me a second here. Actually do it on my...
I'm happy to read it. If not.
Yeah, you could probably do it faster than... Oh, I got it. Okay, Tyler B. So Tyler B says, a non-dev question. Would Beanstalk Farms consider hiring someone to drive business development, build relationships with other DeFi projects, to increase more exposure to Bean to enhance increase more exposure to Bean to enhance its usability? Or does Beanstalk Farms believe that focusing solely on development work is sufficient to attract more projects and people interested in Bean?
Well, I'm happy to give an answer and go, and then maybe it would be interesting to hear what you have to say, Rex. But
Yeah.
you know, I'm not Beanstalk Farms. I'm Guy. But from my perspective, that's not something I expect to be spending much of my time thinking about. But you know, as was demonstrated in Rex's proposal to be on the BFC, there is a process for you know, getting into a position on the BFC that can hire people and have discretion over the budget. And if that's something that, you know, someone here or someone listening later in the recording feels particularly passionate about, would encourage them to, you know, talk to me, reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about it. You know, write a proposal to do so, et cetera, et cetera.
And I would say, when I think about this idea of, you know, biz dev in general, I mean, it's been something we've been talking about for years now. And, you know, Beanstalk has made a couple attempts to work with different groups to do, you know, marketing or business development. And there have been internal folks that have, you know, that have worked in those areas as well. And I would say probably with mixed results. And I guess the first thought that I have is Beanstalk itself is, and you know, just like Guy was speaking on behalf of Guy, I'm Rex speaking on behalf of Rex. When I look at Beanstalk, when I think about Beanstalk, I think of it as more of an economy rather than a product. And so, you know, it's not necessarily easy to create marketing around, you know, building something like an economy. But as we continue to evolve, I mean, what goes through my mind about things like the increasing number of wells in the basin system, I think that is something that is much more like product oriented. You can reach out to individuals or to other DeFi groups and say, hey, we've got this platform that could potentially benefit you either as an individual user or as a partner program. And that puts us in a position to where we could start to have really, really good discussions, you know, outside of, you know, native farmers or folks that are, you know, coming or learning about the protocol kind of, you know, through word of mouth or natively. So, you know, it seems like we're just now getting to that point where we can start to look outside and say, hey, we've got some products that are really good to market. Let's start talking about business development. Let's start talking about, you know, marketing to external users. So I guess that's what goes through my mind, is we're just kind of getting there. I mean, I don't know if anybody has any additional thoughts, or can definitely feel free to correct me if there's something I'm not getting right to. Safevault just said it. If you want things to move on the biz dev side, make a proposal. Let's see them. All right. Any other questions, comments, thoughts from the group?
I guess a couple other things I'll say is, you know, on the note of whitelisting other wells, I guess it is kind of hidden a little bit under the blacklist mitigation write-up, and perhaps it deserves its own. But part of that RFC is to implement a stable swap well function, and I think at some point it definitely makes sense to have other well functions available for anyone to use, and so they don't need to develop and audit themselves. You know, including things like, you know, a constant product well function with a fee, a stable swap well function with a fee, etc. But personally, especially once the blacklist mitigation stuff is up, I think it'd be very cool to have whitelisted wells for things like Bean USDC, Tether, Wrapped Bitcoin, etc.
Appreciate that, guy. And that is what constantly goes through my mind as we talk about, what are we doing using the royal we, or however you want to frame it, to help grow the protocol, recapitalize, or whoever is asking that question and whatever point of reference they're asking from, that the Basin platform is really, as it grows in functionality, it's going to be a really really interesting thing to be able to talk to other groups about, and potentially really make some magic.
Another thing I wanted to add, just because Soil King isn't here to talk about it himself, but a lot of longtime farmers will know we used to have that Dune Dashboard a couple years ago, which was awesome and could answer a ridiculous number of questions that any curious person would have about the state of Beanstalk, the history of Beanstalk, etc. And Soil King has been picking that project back up and working on a lot of the infrastructure over the last couple weeks. Hopefully at some point in the near future, a lot of the queries from the old Dune dashboard can just be cloned onto the new one, and we'll be in a position to easily respond to feedback and suggestions people have to add new data. So personally, very, very excited to see that in place. And related, he's Soil King is also one of another contributor who has been helping out as they've been able to in a part-time capacity more recently, but we'll be able to spend more serious time working on Beanstalk thanks to the budget, which is great. And yeah, there's some good content in the Discord earlier of him putting in his 2 weeks, which I think is why he is not able to make the meeting today, because he has a job.
Current employer probably just wringing that last 2 weeks dry. So it's interesting you mentioned Dune. I've had the thought, as we've been chatting about it, what to do with this meeting and how to continue to improve it. I think there'll probably be some incorporation of, probably just a handful of metrics, that the group might find relevant to see updated every other week, or, be talked about in DAO meetings. Probably not a whole lot of stuff. I don't want to, have a deluge, but, it's probably something that'll be included here as well as we move forward. And with that, I'm definitely willing to take feedback about, this meeting or about the slide deck that's sent out. I'm thinking that deck will probably be refreshed every other week. And then we'll plan to talk once a month. I think I'd mentioned in general that obviously it's the last day of February. We've got a requirement to do a meeting once a month. And so I'd like to get this shifted to where it's happening the first week of every month. So to do that, I'm going to probably do one in 2 weeks to hit the March requirement. And then April, we'll try to get on in the first week of the month. I think I might probably shift to Tuesdays, but still open to talk about times. Was even just talking about that in general before we hopped on here. Definitely willing to be flexible there. But yeah, if anybody here has any questions or thoughts or comments about how to improve this meeting or the information that's provided, don't hesitate to let me know. I'm always willing to take feedback and to try to improve things. So, all right, we're 2 minutes over. We will cut everybody loose, and thank you for your time, and we'll see you around the farm. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for putting this together, Rex.
Of course, my pleasure.